कर्णवघोरे यः कर्णधारस्वरूपकः नमोस्तु रामकृष्णाय तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः. This is the pranam mantra which was composed by M himself, the chronicler of the gospel, and the meaning is salutations to Sri Ramakrishna, salutations to that Guru who is the pilot to take one across the deep sea of the world. This is a verse from the Vishweshwara Tantra, modified suitably to and addressed to Sri Ramakrishna. So today the topic, it's first of all, it's a great pleasure to be talking on, great pleasure and privilege as well, to be talking on or discussing something from the gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, especially on the topic how to lead a God-centered life. In fact, if you read the entire gospel or Kathamrita, all the conversations are centered around God. So for Sri Ramakrishna, leading a God-centered life was as natural as a fish, as swimming is for a fish. Swimming in water is for a fish. So for Sri Ramakrishna, there was nothing else other than a God-centered life. But unfortunately, we are not in the same position. We have to struggle and try to lead a God-centered life. Now, what do we mean by a God-centered life? There are various definitions of God. Everyone has his own concept or own idea, at least in the mind, of what God is like. There are so many conceptions depending on the religion, caste, creed, and nationality also. People believe in different gods, different ideas of gods, or even if they don't believe in God, even if they say that they are atheists, even they have a concept of reality. So reality means something to everybody, whether you call it by the name God or you call it by any other name. Reality is something we have to deal with. So leading a God-centered life is just as saying leading a reality-centered life. Are we aware of the reality within and around us? That is the question. If you have an answer to that question, then our concept of God is more or less correct for us at least. And that is how we have to mold our life. Otherwise, just leading a life, just as animals and other living beings lead, without awareness or without consciousness of the reality, is just, I believe, a waste of life. Sri Ramakrishna also says the same thing in the gospel. He says God realization is the only goal of life. Not that it is one of the goals of life, because the more we believe in this or more we stick to this conviction that God realization is the only goal of life, then our life gets a sort of is connected to reality. Otherwise, it's a very artificial and a shallow life. So, having now convinced ourselves that whatever be our conception of God or reality, leading a God-centered life is the best thing we can do, at least for people who are aware or people who call themselves as human beings. So now, what do we actually mean by leading a God-centered life? To put it in very simple terms, it is how to fix one's mind on God. Because it is through the mind, through the agency of the mind, that we deal with this world. Of course, the body is there. As Vedanta says, we live on several different levels. We live on the level of Annamaya Kosha, that is the gross body. We live on the level, simultaneously, we live on the level of Pranamaya Kosha, the life force that animates this body. We also live on the Manomoy Kosha, the reactive mind, which reacts to the inputs it gets through the different sense organs. So that is the third level of our existence. It's coaxial. I mean, all these existences are uh, connected to each other. So, living at the level of Annamaya Kosha, almost every being, sentient or insentient, it does that. The gross existence is very much perceptible, tangible to all of us. There is nothing to believe or have conviction. It's a conviction for almost all of us, including the atoms and the small biological cells, the small cells that are there in the world. So everybody knows that this gross existence is very much real. So one does not have to tell people that this gross world is a reality. So what is reality? What is uh, God, or what is the real nature of this so-called reality? We come to a higher level, we also observe, then we see the life forces when we evolve from insentient to sentient beings. Sentient beings have one more faculty, that is the life force, which according to science is sometimes known as consciousness. The idea of consciousness is normally in a very crude way is compared to the life force. So you say a being is conscious when it exhibits some kind of life force. But Vedanta has gone deeper. So anyway, this life force or the pranamaya kosha is the second level of existence, which is telescoped into our personality. The outer part of the telescope, you may say, is the annamaya kosha or the body, the sense organs, the eyes, ears, and all the indriyas, which give us input from the world outside. And then we have the pranamaya kosha, which animates this annamaya kosha, because to make it work, we require the pranamaya kosha. So these are as far as the two gross levels which are perceptible, very clearly perceptible. Then we have one more higher level, which is again telescoped into this five koshas. That is the manomaya kosha. This manomaya kosha I would translate as the reactive mind. Its only function is to perceive the world through the sense organs, the object outside, present it to the subject. We will discuss what the subject is, but at least the sense organs, just as a camera or any other audio device, catches the sound. These organs also, karmendriyas and the gyanendriyas, they catch all these inputs, and the processing center, the highly reactive center, which is a very subtle thing, is the mind, and we perceive that mind also. So these three things are perceived by everybody, including the animals. Even an animal has a rudimentary mind. So only thing is human beings have a refined mind which can analyze or a little more deeply, but still it is gross. So the mind manomaya kosha, till the manomaya kosha level, there's no doubt about its perception. Everybody perceives it, right from the animals with whom we share our three koshas to the highest human being. All of them, there's absolutely no doubt about the reality, at least till we uh, go higher. There's absolutely no doubt about the existence or the reality which the Annamaya Kosha, Pranamaya Kosha, and the Manomaya Kosha presents itself to the subject, to the soul. Then going a level higher, when we say human being has spiritually evolved, he develops a finer faculty of the mind, which is known as buddhi. It has nothing to do with the IQ. Most most of the colloquial uh, Indian language, I mean, in the colloquial language, Bengali or any other Hindi, when you say buddhiman or he's full of buddhi, we normally mean intelligence, the worldly intelligence, the gross intelligence. That is not what buddhi is. That is where we make the mistake. The buddhi or the Vijnanamaya kosha is a highly sattvic plane of existence. It is material, no doubt. It is part of Prakriti. All these five koshas are part of Prakriti. So this buddhi is a very subtle mind, subtle level of the mind, unlike the manas or the manomaya kosha, which enables us to distinguish between things which are temporary, gross, and permanent of a permanent nature. Now, the permanent thing within us is not perceivable for most of us, though we are aware of it, but we are not perceiving it as we perceive the external objects. So, for the time being, they are not very real to us. That's why when somebody says, I believe in God, he doesn't know what he means. What is his concept of God? Is it some avatara, or is it some idol, or is it some concept which or some name, just a name? It is just a name for most of us. So leading a God-centered life means presupposes that you know what God is. So we come to the fourth level, that is the Vijnanamaya Kosha, where a human being develops the capacity to focus inward. Now, by inward, I mean focus deep into the levels of our existence. Something within which says, I. Something which does not, which persists when even when you are in the waking state or the dream state or even the deep sleep state where everything else is the mano, the all the other koshas seem to have gone to sleep, but this I or that ahankara still persists. So that awareness, trying to search for that awareness, we come to the Vijnanamaya Kosha, which gives us a clear idea, a distinction between the object and the subject. It tries to give. So it is the nearest we come, the reflection of the pure consciousness of or the pure awareness within all of us, within the cosmos, within the whole creation, which within the intelligent creation, which presupposes a wonderful order. Nothing happens haphazardly. Everything, including the planets, the stars, and the cells, everybody seems to be working in precision. So there is a universal intelligence, which in Vedanta is known as Mahat. So when we go to that Mahat, we come to the concept of Ishvara. Ishvara is the universal mind, of which this our buddhi is a very, very, very small part. Now that gives us a pretty good idea of what our Vijnanamaya Kosha or buddhi is. Then with this buddhi, with a refined mind, manas, or a refined buddhi, we come very near to the perception or the idea of God. Till then, it is just some names, some words. It really doesn't mean anything. So, when anybody says, I am leading a God centered life, the first question one should ask is, what is your idea of God? If your idea of God is a powerful ruler who gives you justice, then you will be worshipping him in a different way. You will be totally guiding or molding your life in a totally different way. But if you have a higher conception of God, the highest conception of God, then God centered life means something else. So when you say leading a God centered life, it depends on what your conception of God is. Now, to make things simple, we come to the conception of Ishvara in Vedanta, which is the highest possible conception a mind can have. We hear in the Vedas that it is unknowable, it is achinta rupa, which cannot be thought of. The mind is incapable of thinking the infinite. We can only think about finite things which are perceived, which we see, which are tangible for our organs to see. So that is the gross world. Even the subtle world, we can, through analogy, we can make some judgments. But this is something beyond the mind. If it is beyond the mind, how can we perceive it? And how can we say that we are leading a God-centered life uh, around something which we cannot perceive? It is inconceivable. If you say God, the word God, it just means three alphabets, God, God, or Allah, or any other name. It just means a name. But what is this idea of God? The nearest they came, Vedanta came, to defining through the mind, though it is a very, very incomplete definition, it gives a fairly good idea of God. And that is the idea of Ishvara, or beyond that, Sat, Chit, and Ananda. When it manifests itself in the universe, what is its nature? So it may be inconceivable, but we can define some of the characteristics which give us a pretty good idea. So the idea of Ishvara, who has, which is, which has, which possesses the universal or cosmic mind. Now that our buddhi is a small part of that cosmic mind. This much I think every scientific person or anybody who has uh, uh, taken taken shelter in reason can accept that these are the small minds which we have. Our brains are not fit enough to express it, but still we have our own so-called buddhi, our own wisdom. Now this wisdom is incomplete, we feel, when we have a concept of God, any concept of God, whether it's a Hindu concept of God, Muslim or Christian. We have a idea of a mind or an intelligence which is far superior than us. So if we call it a cosmic mind which guides the whole universe, which whose planning is much better than the highest human mind, then we can say we are parts of that universal mind, because we are part of the universe, the gross universe, the subtle universe that we see around us, the forces and the material universe that we see around us, sentient and insentient universe we see around us. But we have to accept this fact, which that our small buddhi, our small minds are part of that universal mind or mahat. So coming to that level, now we can start our spiritual quest. So when our buddhi awakens, that is why the whole Gayatri mantra is designed, or maybe that is the most important mantra in the Vedas, because the Gayatri mantra is a constant prayer to that cosmic mind or to Ishvara or to the uh, Prakriti herself, that please awaken Dhi. Dhi means Buddhi. Please awaken my Buddhi so I can perceive you clearly, much more clearly than what I am doing now. Now things are very hazy for me. I am seeing everything mixed up, as it were. The gross Annamaya Kosha, the gross body, that is Virat, the sum total of the Annamaya Kosha is known as Virat. The sum total of the Pranamaya Kosha are the different pranas of which you see in the universe. They can be any force. It can be the life force, it can be other forces like gravitation. There are so many forces which are impinging upon matter and creating or recreating and modifying and this whole universe. So we are all witness to that. We know these things. So science has gone deep enough to contemplate on the nature of this Annamaya Kosha or the Virat and the Pranamaya Kosha, the prana, universal prana and the universal matter. So we don't need any further inquiry. I mean, we need inquiry. We can go deeper and deeper, but it will not lead us anywhere. We have to go to a higher level of the mind and the buddhi. So this buddhi, which is a part of the universal mind, that buddhi has to be somehow attached to the cosmic mind, which you can call as Ishvara or God or incarnation. For convenience, we take up these incarnations or the symbols, the Shivalinga, and so many symbols are there in different religion. We superimpose that idea of Sat, Chit and Ananda. I'll explain why that Sat, Chit, Ananda word comes. So that idea has to be superimposed on this Ishvara or incarnation or Ishta Devata or whatever it is. This is in simple the philosophy behind our quest for God, leading a God-centered life. If we have this idea of God, then it doesn't really matter which God you worship, which tradition you belong to. This concept has to be very clear, that Sat, Chit and Ananda. Why Sat, Chit and Ananda? The reason being, Sat is pure existence. Existence, everybody of us, we do not want to cease from existing. That is, we all fear death. Though we fear gross death, we fear what actually is manifesting as fear of death is fear of losing our existence, which we never lose, but we, out of ignorance, we think we are losing our existence. So existence is one thing which is common to all of us, the animals, the plants, even everybody tries to exist. Then we have the consciousness or the knowledge. Everyone knows something or the other. Without knowledge or without the conscious knowledge, mankind cannot exist. So the common factor is existence, consciousness, and the third thing is everybody in everybody, every sane person wants bliss or joy. Nobody wants sorrow. So these are the three things which have been used to define the idea of God. So the David Bentley Hart wrote a beautiful book, Existence, Consciousness, and Bliss. The idea of God, the idea of the conception of God, which is consciousness, that is the best possible definition. So taking this definition as the center around which we have to lead a God-centric life. Our existence, if it has to be God-centric, it has to rotate, or it has to be centered around this concept of God. Now, that Sat, Chit, and Ananda, pure consciousness, pure existence, pure, that means unbroken existence, eternal existence. Pure consciousness means not consciousness which is broken, which is there now, which does not exist after some time. No, it is also eternal. It is of eternal nature. And eternal joy, which is not broken. It's not the joy which results in sorrow after some time. So that is unbroken joy, or that is known as, also known as bliss. So Satchit Ananda, when you try to uh, personalize that whole thing, that concept, into a person, you either call him Ishvara, or you call him an incarnation, or Avatara, or God, or whatever other name you would like to give him. So we have to center our life around this concept. And how to do it? Now that is the main question. How to live a God-centered life? What God is, we have understood that we have to lead a God-centered life. That is the only thing we can possibly, the best thing, not the only thing, that's the best thing we can do if we are sensible. And if we accept these two things, then the question arises, how to live a God-centered life? Now that is the question. It's easy to say that one should lead a God-centered life, but how can one do it actually? So what prevents us from leading a God-centered life? Now that is another way of looking at things. How to lead a God-centered life is a question. If you want to answer, how to prevent ourselves, ourselves from not leading a God-centered life. So we read so many passages just now, and in the gospel everywhere you will find 4 or 5 wonderful methods. Sri Ramakrishna is not tired of repeating these methods. These are the 3 or 4 methods which he says, because the first question which M asked, after getting a nice scolding from Sri Ramakrishna, when he tried to explain what he knew about philosophy and God and all those things and life, he had his very limited views based on incomplete philosophy, or I should not say Western philosophy, but any kind of, his philosophy was incomplete, and he had strange notions about spirituality, God, and all those things. So in the first meeting, all his doubts were cleared. He was nicely scolded, and then he just decided, let me not argue anymore. Let me just ask questions. How to gain love and devotion to God? That's the first question. The first serious conversation M has recorded in the gospel. So he says, the first thing he says, how can one fix the mind on God? After accepting the fact what God is, what God vision is, what the reality known as, which we call as God is. Now the question is how to fix the mind, because all our interactions with the world involve the mind. The Manomay Kosha is so important. Though There are higher levels of existence, but for most of us, we still live at the level of the mind. Of course, you may say that there are plants and animals which live at the level of Annamaya and Pranamaya Kosha exclusively, with very little use of the mind. But even they use some kind of rudimentary mind. It's the window to the reality on one side, and it's a window to the external world on the other side. So this mind is something which we cannot do away with. So leading a God-centered life means, how does the mind, it, to put it in a very simple sentence, how can one fix one's mind on God? Leading a God-centered life, because the mind, wherever it focuses itself, it sees that as reality. If the mind considers money as the reality, it will run after money. That is one important principle of life which one should remember. Whatever is our mental conception of reality, we go after that. It doesn't require rocket science to explain this. Even a child knows. If it considers a chocolate as something, a reality to be eaten, it will go after the chocolate. You can't prevent. Because for that child, that toy or that chocolate is the ultimate reality. You offer him something wonderful, something greater, more expensive watch, it will just throw it. Because for him, the chocolate is more real than the watch, because it has no importance for that child. So at his level of intelligence, for him the reality is the chocolate which it has tasted before, the child has tasted, and he knows, I want this. So every human being, though he may not aspire for God as we understand or as Vedanta explains, he is running after something which he thinks is absolutely real. If he does not think money is real, be assured that people will not run after money. So that is why this delusion, or what you call the Maya Shakti, which has been explained in Vedanta, is just this. It is a mixture of real and unreal. Shankaracharya puts it so beautifully that this uh, mixing of the conscious and the unconscious, the strange mixture, is nothing but this Maya Shakti. So Maya Shakti is something which makes you through the mind, and the agent is always the mind. We have to remember that. That's why the question of how to fix the mind on God is nothing but how to lead a God-centered life. If we want to lead a God-centered life, we have to fix our minds on the concept of God, the highest concept of God. But there are, for different people, the concept of God, or I should say the concept of reality, can be a lower ideal. See, for example, Sri Ramakrishna says people cry day and night for jugs of tears they shed for money, for their relatives and all, because they consider them to be real. You can't blame them. If somebody cries for God, the highest conception of God, it is only because he considers God to be absolutely real. But you can't blame a person who thinks money is absolutely real. His samsara around, the little universe around him, is absolutely real, real to such an extent that he will shed jugs of tears. So Sri Ramakrishna is very clear right from beginning how to lead a God-centered life. First have the idea of God clarified. Then whether you consider it to be real. Otherwise, let us go, let us we can hope that the people will go back to square one. It is better than leading a hypocritical life, because if you don't consider God to be real, then how can you expect somebody to go after it? It's just like asking a child to give up the toy and the chocolate and go after a very expensive, some expensive thing which may be very useful for adults. But you convince the child, it will say, no, I want this. I don't want that, because it has no value for that. So first of all, the value has to be created. To lead a God-centered life, a value has to be created in our mind, and we have to force our mind or fix our mind on the reality, so that on God, so that the idea of God becomes a reality in our life. So that is the main challenge. To lead a God-centered life, first we have to believe in, not only believe, but have a conviction that God alone is real and all else is unreal. So what do you mean by unreal? Are we not seeing it as reality every day? What unreal means, actually it is known as anitya. Nitya, nitya, vastu viveka. Nitya means that which is permanent, that which does not change, that which is akshara, which does not decay. So it does not, again, as I say, rocket science to take up one object after another in the world and find out how real or how not real, how permanent it is. It is real, no doubt, but how permanent it is, how long lasting it is. Everybody knows. We know a good quality machine will last more. So we know what are the things which will last longer. We have so much, we have definitely got that much intelligence. So Sri Ramakrishna begins with Nitya Anitya Vastu Viveka. Nitya means that which is permanent and that which is temporary. It's a very simple technique. No, we don't require any philosophy or reading of many shastras for this. That's why Thakur has simplified all the attempts which spiritual people make to lead a God-centered life into 4 or 5 things. The first, he says, Nitya Nitya Vastu first, or it can be in any sequence, but start with Nitya Nitya Vastu Viveka. So what is temporary and what is permanent? That which stays with you or gives you a sense of security, eternal security. So when we talk of God, our concept of God should be one, whoever may be our Ishta. We have to have these minimum qualities. We discussed in the Gita class yesterday also. There are 8 different qualities. I'll not go into those details because Thakur Sri Ramakrishna does not wish to confuse us more. But one thing you have to remember, Nitya Nitya Vastu, by that he's giving all the definitions or ideas about God. Anitya means that which is temporary. So you take the Annamaya Kosha. Is it permanent or temporary? Very clear. It gets destroyed. Maybe at the most it will last 100 years. Then you come to the prana. Prana also, it has a tendency to become weak. It is not unchangeable. It is not akshara. It wears out. The prana goes, prana comes, prana becomes weak. We have seen this in our own lives. So the mind also has its ups and downs. We can't say it is a stable thing. The vrittis are so unstable. In fact, 90% of our suffering, of course, Swamiji says 1/3 of our suffering is the Annamaya Kosha, the weak body, and the Annamaya and the Pranamaya Kosha, 1/3. But 2/3 is definitely the mind. The suffering is the wavering or the uh, impermanent nature of the mind. At one point of time, the mind is happy, other point of time, it is suffering, it goes down into depression. And this constant flux or change is something which gives a lot of suffering, this changeable nature. So whenever you run after something as permanent, as nitya, and find it to be anitya, you become sad. Sorrow comes as a result of chasing the anitya, thinking it to be nitya. That is the idea. When Sri Ramakrishna says nitya nitya vastu viveka, but this is only one part of the solution. This is only one technique which he says. After having ascertained what is permanent, we have to hitch our wagon, as they say in English. We hitch our mind, fix our mind on the permanent thing for a major portion of the day, if not throughout the day. It's not possible, otherwise we would have become like Sri Ramakrishna, leading a God-centered life for 24 hours per day. But at least we have to increase its frequency. So fixing the mind again and again on God, the simplest method is by chanting the mantra Nitya Nitya Vastu Viveka. So fixing the mind on God implies that we have to repeat the japa or chanting his names and guru. That is the second part of the solution Sri Ramakrishna is giving us to lead a God-centered life. So whenever we get some spare time, instead of allowing the mind to wander over anitya, the temporal things, we have to make a resolution that every day we will spend some time in unifying our minds with the eternal. Our buddhi should be safe and secure meditating or in the company of somebody who is stable, who is secure. And that Nitya Vastu is God, that eternal existence, Sat, Chit, and Ananda, which does not change, which does not wane, or which does not, it's not temporary. So, keeping the company of God by chanting his names and glories or prayers, and any method is okay. Whether you do it is through emotion, if it is through emotion, it is bhakti yoga. If you do it through knowledge, through thinking about his glories or thinking about the eternal qualities of the Ishvara, then it is Jnana yoga. Or if you dedicate the work that you do, that is one of the mental powers we have. We have four types of mental powers. All of us, we know of three major mental powers which we have to direct or fix towards the eternal, to lead a God-centered life. One of them is thinking, the other is feeling, the other is willing, the willpower. So these three forces we are consciously or unconsciously using for doing different things in the world. So instead of using the thinking, feeling, and willing faculties of the mind exclusive on temporal things, at least for some part of the day, why not focus it on something which is permanent, of a more permanent or secure nature? So that will give us security. We are, we should allow or utilize some time, if it is Jnana Yoga, thinking about the glories of God through prayers, and then pray with devotion, that is Bhakti Yoga. And then there is this Karma Yoga, where we do work and dedicate it to our Ishta, to Ishvara, to God, because we are part of the cosmic yajna. That concept we have to remember always. The cosmic yajna or a sacrifice is always going on. Everybody is dependent on somebody else. We are dependent on the food, the animals, each animal is dependent on some other animal for food. So this whole cycle is going on with clockwork precision. So all our karma should not break this. If we break the rules and break the order, then we will suffer. So karma yoga is actually nothing but participating in this cosmic sacrifice with a win-win situation. You give something, then only you can take. If we grab things from nature without giving back, then nature has its own way of uh, making things equal. You know, it has its own way of settling the dispute. So we have to contribute something before taking something. So that is karma yoga, participating in the universal sacrifice which God has created, the cosmic order, the beautiful cosmic order, which is the sign of an intelligent God or an intelligent mind, cosmic mind, which is working to live in harmony with that, to work in harmony, not to work in harmony with that, is what is known as karma yoga. So using our willpower, all our willpower, and purifying it by making it attuned to the cosmic will is karma yoga. To emotionally align yourself with God is one another way of fixing the mind on God, using our emotional powers. And then the third power which comes is the thinking which we do, the thinking capacity which we have, that if we dedicate, it becomes Jnana Yoga. And the last yoga, which is the common basis of all the three yogas, is the power of restraining. The power of restraining is the wonderful power of Raj Yoga, power of restraining the waves of the mind. This was a discovery made in India, especially when Patanjali formulated the Yoga Sutras. He said there is one more power of the mind, and that is very simple, of Chitta. The Chitta has a tendency to create waves. So the flowing water or the flowing waves, if they are controlled, they generate a large amount of potential energy. If you dam a river, the water which is accumulated is capable of generating tremendous energy. So that power of restraining is the fourth power which gives rise to a science of sadhana which is known as Raj Yoga. So through these four yogas, one can fix the mind on God. This is how we lead a God-centered life. But many times within the individual willpower or the individual thinking or the individual emotions are not sufficient for one to fix the mind on God. Now and then there is a tendency of the surroundings, of the atmosphere around us, of the environment around us to pull us down, because gravity is the law of life. People, it is very difficult to push things up, but it is very easy. You say the things are gravitating down. So our minds also are no exception. Just as any physical object, the most common thing for the mind is to go down. So when it goes down, it gravitates down. It has a tendency to become more and more gross. So to lift that mind, to make it more subtle, to take it to the level of buddhi, you need satsanga. So Sri Ramakrishna used to say sadhu sangha or satsanga. What happens is you attune your mind. You may not be able to attune your mind to the cosmic mind directly, but you have an intermediate person who has perhaps succeeded to a certain extent to attune his mind. So when you come to his proximity, then you will find, or his or her proximity, you will find that your mind has a tendency to be elevated. It is just like you go to a hot source of fire. There is a tendency for every other object which goes near it to become hot. So it's something like that. This satsanga or the company of the holy. So Sri Ramakrishna says, is telling Master Mahashaya, that the mind doesn't fix itself on God while living day and night in the midst of worldly activities and family life, which are dragging the mind down, which has a natural tendency to drag the mind down to the gross things. So to push it up, you require nirjan vas, going into solitude now and then. The best thing to do if you don't get satsanga, if somebody to lift you up, at least don't go down. So to prevent that, as a emergency measure, Sri Ramakrishna says, now and then you should go to solitude or nirjan vas. So this is a very important aspect. Out of these four aspects, Sri Ramakrishna used to give so much of importance to mental solitude, not just physical solitude. To be alone, to be not to be dragged down by, even that helps a lot. If one cannot go up, at least let us stay on one level. Let us not be dragged or gravitated towards a lower level. So to prevent that, you need solitude. So that after getting solitude, if one has the opportunity, then one has to get the opportunity for satsanga. So now and then he says we have to go and meditate on God. In the very first stage, it is very hard to fix the mind on God. That is why Sri Ramakrishna gives that wonderful example of the fence. When the goat is there, the plant is there, the cows will devour it. So in the beginning, solitude gives you some kind of protection. It may not help you to grow, but it helps you from going down. So solitude is a very important thing. Nirjan vas, now and then. If we don't get holy company, solitude is something which everybody can try and manage to get. If one can do it, the solitary corner, Sri Ramakrishna says, if you can't go to the vana, go to the kona or the mind. Mind itself, you can create a space in the mind, solitary space in the mind. If you get a forest, it is fine, but even in the forest, you will be carrying your whole mind there. But a solitary corner in the house is also fine, where you are at least for some time left to yourself, left to deal with your own minds. We cannot deal with our own minds, the volatile, reactive minds, and we complicate it with further agitation, with further involvement in things that don't concern us. So that is one important aspect of how to lead a God-centered life. First, go into solitude. It is just like hedging a young tender plant. So once the tree grows, then you don't need solitude. Then you can be in any company and your personality will be so dominant, spiritual personality, that it will not have a tendency to be dragged down. In fact, you can lift other people. So that is what Sri Ramakrishna is giving us. And then with that mind, with the mind which has been strengthened in solitude, which has got an opportunity to discriminate between the eternal God and the eternal substance and all the temporary substances through Nitya Nitya Vastu Vivek, then you will be able to practically shake off the attachment. It's very easy to say Vairagya and Abhyasa. Abhyasa means repeating the God name. People say do Abhyasa and Vairagya. Gita also says that. But how to do this Abhyasa? How to cultivate Vairagya? First is discriminating, then going into solitude. If possible, get holy company where somebody helps you how to distinguish between the real and the unreal, the temporary and the permanent, and how to hold on to the permanent substance and shake off, if possible, slowly the attachment to the perishable things of the world. Now, these are important things because you can't go both ways. As Jesus said, you can't have God and mammon at the same time. If you want to lead a God-centered life, you have to go away from the gross. So, and the scientific methodology of taking the Godward journey or making the Godward journey is to go from control the gross with the subtle. So Annamaya Kosha, we know it is a matter of common experience that our Annamaya body is controlled by the subtle forces. The food that we eat, the digestion power which we have, the power of digestion, the power of assimilation, the power of exercise, the prana which we create in the body, that controls the body. The body does not control the prana, though it has some effect on the prana, but it is through uh, treating the prana. What does medicine do? It treats the prana so that the body becomes okay, body becomes healthy. So the scientific principle behind all the spiritual endeavor is the gross is always controlled by something which is finer than that. So prana controls the Annamaya Kosha. So we do that. That is what we do during asanas and pranayama. We use our prana shakti to discipline our body, to make it strong. It's not the other way around. Then we go a higher state, go to a higher level, that is Manomaya Kosha. It is the mind which controls the lower two states of prana. So if we train the manas or train the manas through all the different yogas by fixing it on the eternal substance, then, or eternal substance or God, if we lead a God-centered life in the mind, then that mind becomes strong to control the Annamaya and the Pranamaya Kosha. It's like you should always put the horse before the cart. Unfortunately, we put the cart before the horse, and then the horse finds it difficult to pull or to move the cart because the right place for the horse is in front. So also we give mind the least importance in our education, in our dealing with our own lives. The mind is given so much less attention, even in our education system. We spend so much time in uh, developing skills of the body and the prana. Even in yoga, the asanas and all are designed to improve the skill of the two lower koshas, but proportionate attention is not given to the mind, whereas the mind is something which can pull both the prana and the Annamaya Kosha. So putting the horse before the cart, not the cart before the horse, means you go to higher and higher levels. Then through these spiritual practices, leading a God-centered life, the supreme power lies with the Atman, which is beyond all the five koshas. And that has a tremendous attraction capacity. Leading a God-centered life means attuning your buddhi, your will, your emotions, everything, all the mind, body, and the mind-body complex, and the prana, everything you have to attune to a higher power, which is definitely controlling. If it can control the cosmos, it can definitely control our mind. So that is what is meant by leading a God-centered life, that connecting ourselves to a higher source of strength. So we go from lower levels to the higher levels, and that is what Vairagya means. Vairagya doesn't mean just giving up gross objects. Why do we give why do we have to lessen the gross objects? Because most of our energy is focused on that. Then there is very little energy left to attune ourselves to a higher reality, which can really save us, which can give us permanent security, which can give us permanent peace, which can give us permanent strength, and which can give us all sorts of things to deal with the tensions and the problems of the life that we are dealing with. We are trying to put the cart before the horse and trying to solve our problems. That is what happens when somebody goes with a sick mind. What the doctors do, they give some drugs. So they make them dependent on certain gross substances, the physiological, which has some physiological impact, and try to control the prana by some gross material. It works for some time, no doubt, but ultimately it ruins the personality. So medicines and all those things, though as a temporary measure they may be okay, but in the long run we have to put the horse before the cart. So that is the idea. Leading a God-centered life means progressively going from the grosser to the subtler. That is why in Gita, Anoraniyan Mahato Mahiyan, in the Upanishad it is said. So he is subtlest than the subtler, than the subtle. There are so many subtle things, the mind, the buddhi, even the Anandamaya Kosha, it's slightly higher. But even more subtle than that is the Ishvara, or the Lord, who is more subtle, and by virtue of that, the Lord is able to control all the things which are lower in order, more grosser than itself. So the golden rule is, of whether you call it Vairagya, how to explain Vairagya, the simplest thing is you don't have to give up anything. You have to give up the gross for the subtle. So you can't have both. As Jesus very clearly said, you can't have God and mammon at the same time. You have a limited strength of mind, you have a limited capacity. If you want the gross, then it will be at the expense of the subtle, and that makes you prone to all the trials and tribulations of the world. So the amount of energy being fixed, every human being has come with a baggage of energy, or baggage of uh, or some kind of samskaras. So he has to see that it becomes more and more God centered, for the very simple reason that we will be more stable, more secure, more peaceful, and more joyful, more blissful if we do, because that is the very nature of God. So I think these are the, I think I have completed 45 minutes. Nathu, Vidyadhar?
Uh, yes, Maharaj, but I mean,
Yeah.
you can continue. I mean,
No, no, it's fine. So if there are some questions, you can ask.
sure. So we'll open it up for questions if anybody has. So
Or you
any
can just
questions?
type it in chat also. I can.
Yeah.
I have a question basically. Help
Yes.
us determination, Ichha Shakti. That is
Yes.
there in Vijnanamaya Kosha or that is there in Manamaya Kosha.
No, it is, they are all,
Determination helps
it is,
me
yeah,
change
all these
my.
Shaktis, all the three Shaktis, Ichha Shakti, Kriya Shakti, Jnana Shakti, whether you call it emotion and all those, these are all qualities or characteristics of the mind. So they have to be developed. So they are part and parcel of the manas, not the buddhi. Buddhi is a concentrated, buddhi is much higher than these Shaktis. But as the Shaktis develop, as the mind becomes pure and strong, then it becomes more and more sattvic. It becomes more and more subtle. The idea is, the more subtle a thing, the more stronger it is. It's the subtler thing which controls the grosser thing below it. So, Ichha Shakti, Jnana Shakti, these are all the different powers of the mind, actually, the manas. So, they are not part of the Vijnanamaya Kosha, when you go to the Vijnanamaya Kosha, the Buddhi, then you say all the Shaktis become refined, and definitely it becomes strengthened at the level of Vijnanamaya Kosha. So the idea is to convert our reactive mind. That means make it less gross. Reactive mind is very close to the Indriyas and the body and the prana. So, one part of the mind, the chitta is made of 4 aspects. Mana, buddhi, chitta is the mind stuff actually. So, it has a tendency to take the form of the manas, which in which all the 3, 4 powers are there. But depending on how you use it, if you use Ichha Shakti to run towards the gross, then the Ichha Shakti will become gross and it will get merged in the lower levels of existence. But if you use the Ichha Shakti to go towards the God, the same Ichha Shakti, the same emotional powers, the same emotional Shakti, they can be directed either inwards towards God or towards the subtle, or can be directed towards the gross. So, whichever direction you direct it or divert it, it gets the corresponding strength. So they are part of manas.
Pranam Swamiji.
Yes, namaste.
Namaste. This is Kavita from Sydney, Australia.
Yes, please. Nice to hear you. I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Yeah, I'll open the video. How are you, Maharaj?
Namaste.
Then Pranam, Maharaj. Pranam.
Yes.
What a wonderful deliberation. And I was just trying to comprehend all the 4 points, 4 techniques that you were talking about.
Yes.
The first one was from Nitya versus Anitya, focus on Nitya versus Anitya. And second was to take your mind from the gross to the subtle.
Yeah, manas to the buddhi level.
Manas to the buddhi level. And keep the sadhu sang, satsang. That was another one. Yeah. And and increase your
solitude.
Japa.
Increase your japa. Japa is the main thing. That is a proactive way to do it. But there are things which drag us down. So as a temporary measure, you use solitude. Solitude is not it is a remedy, no doubt. But it acts in a different way, in a negative way, or not negative way, in a neutral way. By putting indirect way, you can say solitude helps you in an indirect way by creating a fence around the plant, as it were. But to grow, you need japa. You need sadhu sangha or satsanga, and you need a positive, proactive prayer, japa, and all those things. Mantra. The mantra also creates. These are proactive methods, whereas these are preventive methods. The solitude and nitya vastu viveka also is a sort of, you can say, a positive approach, because you go after the permanent and leave the temporary things as far as is practicable. You can't leave all of a sudden. So vairagya means only that. Just think a little before acting, whether these things are perishable or they are permanent. So whatever is of a permanent nature will stay with you. Whatever is of a temporary nature can be taken away from you. That is simple.
Just a quick query for solitude, regarding solitude. Like if I want to spend some time with my plants and in the garden and just keep maunam, so do you think that would be considered as solitude or no?
Oh, solitude has nothing to do with time, place and other things. It's a mental attitude actually. But physical solitude, of course, requires some kind of less disturbance. But when you do gardening, plants in a very quiet way, you are actually performing karma yoga, and that is also a solitude. Unattached work, if you do, you are doing it as part of the cosmic yajna, the cosmic sacrifice. So you are giving something to Prakriti. You're not just grabbing flowers from them. You're not cutting flowers indiscriminately. You are watering them, you are growing them, and then with permission, you have to. We had some monks who used to offer very rarely flowers in their own shrine on special days. But even those roses, he used to grow himself. And he used to stand before the plant and said, please give me one flower so that I can offer it to God.
So how beautiful.
So that attitude is important.
Very true.
So that gives you a kind of satsanga also and solitude also.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Maharaj. Wonderful, wonderful
So,
deliberation.
how is
Thank you so
everything in Australia? All-
It's quite under control as far as corona is concerned, but people are quite alert. We are not allowed to jump on the public transport without the mask, and
Okay.
even in the public places. So everybody's careful. So it is quite under control.
Okay. Okay. You are
And even
keeping
if
well?
there, yes, thank you, Maharaj. And even if there are one or two cases here and there, the government can trace them down from where it has come, and that's the way they are controlling.
Anyway, it has resulted in a lot of solitude, forced solitude.
Yes, Maharaj. Thank you, Maharaj. Pranam,
Yes.
Charan Sparsh. Pranam.
I see a question from Surendra. So,
Yes. What is that? Can I read? It is on chat.
No,
yes,
no,
Maharaj,
Maharaj.
I just see a hand. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
you can ask. You can ask. Yes.
Maharaj, I could not write it on the chat. I was getting it all wrong. Anyway,
Okay.
my question is, Swamiji, could you just enumerate the 4 steps again, just in short?
Okay. The first step is Nitya Nitya Vastu Vivek. Any order. You can go in any order. Nitya Nitya Vastu Viveka means discriminating between the permanent and the temporary. So it's a very simple. The grosser thing, the more temporary it is. The subtler thing, it's more permanent. Though it is also perishable, but it lasts a little longer. So you go towards the subtle levels of existing, you are going towards the permanent. And God is the most permanent entity. So He is the only thing, eternal substance, the real substance. That is Nitya Nitya Vastu Viveka. Second thing is solitude. It's of a protective or preventive nature, that going into solitude will prevent the mind from gravitating towards the gross. That's the least we can do. If we can't do satsang, if we can't do japa, at least the nirjanvas, solitude, keeps the status quo. It will at least prevent the mind from going further down. So it has a negative but protective effect, like the fence around a tree. That is the second thing, nirjanvas. Then comes sadhu sangha or satsanga. That is holding on or having the company of somebody who is holding on to the higher reality or who is leading a God-centered life. So that is the definition of sadhu sangha. So it can be a book also, because book also, there is some sadhu sangha going on between Master Masha and Thakur. It's a God-centered life they are discussing throughout in the book. In the gospel, you will not find anything other than God. And finally, the most proactive or the best thing is to Nama Japa and prayer. So Nama Japa can be just a japa of the mantra, or it can be emotional prayer, which doesn't have to be in words. It can be just a feeling, or it can be any work. And then there is one more which I forgot to tell. I'll take this opportunity to tell. To do karma yoga with the spirit of worship or sacrifice. How to do it? Sri Ramakrishna gives a wonderful example. You have to work without attachment. And the example he gives is, live in the household as if you are living, as if you are a housemaid working in somebody's house. You love all the people, you work for them, you do everything for them as if you are their own, they are your own. But in the heart of your hearts, it's an attitude. It's not that you neglect any of the work, but while doing the work, the focus should be on the God within, who is your own. Own home means, in this case, the maid thinks of her children and her home. But in our case, when we work, we have to think of our home as God. So that is leading a God-centered life. So that is the fifth step, you may say, how to work in the world. Otherwise, all the other steps are I have explained. Is it okay?
Fantastic. Yes, Maharaj. Thank you.
There's one
Thank you,
more
Maharaj.
question from Lakshmi Hazra. One more question. How do you discriminate the images that emerge during your meditation? Which are the divine ones and which are the ones which stem from your desires and drives? Oh, this is the same thing, logic you apply for the gross things. You have to apply in the dream or in during your meditation. Meditation is a sort of I would not call it a dream. It is a daydream sort of thing. It is using one imagination to kill another imagination. So when you meditate, when you try to meditate, meditation of course means dhyana. which is a very high state. I am talking of pratyahara and other things, the lower forms of meditation, where the images that occur to you are nothing but reflections of the gross images you have seen outside. So if you see something which is gross and it comes as an image, you have to just distinguish or discriminate and remove it from your mind. And the ones which stem from desires are the ones normally which are gross. And the higher desires or the other things which come to your mind about the eternal, there also you can discriminate between the eternal and the non-eternal. The images, so for example, you meditate, when you are meditating on the Ishta, suddenly the idea of food comes. So you know that food is something not connected to anything eternal. It is a temporary measure. I will take care of it when I come out from meditation. So you have to drive that away from the mind, and then you have to focus on the eternal substance. So that is exactly what you do in meditation. Again and again, the mind has a tendency to go down. Again and again, the mind has to be fixed on the eternal. It goes to the non-eternal. Again, it has to be taken to the eternal. So the non-eternal can be many things. It need not be gross food. It can be gross thoughts, gross desires, which take you towards, which attaches you towards the world. So you have to, it's very easy. The same discrimination you use when you deal with the gross objects, you have to use when you meditate. It's okay?
Thank you.
Maharaj, I think we
Yes.
are right now, I think almost to the end of the session. Unless there are
Yes.
any more questions, we could possibly close with bhajan.
Yes, yes. We'll close with a prayer.
Yes, Maharaj, your prayer, and then we can.
Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. So shall I close the session? You please send me the recording. Huh?
Yes, Maharaj, I'll send the recording. Okay,
Okay. Thank you.
Maharaj.